Hello, welcome back to my channel Bevvy with Beth. I'm Beth and today I am drinking Twinings peppermint tea. This is one of my favourite teas to drink. In fact, I'm out, I need to go and get some more. I have this very often at the end of the day. I just find it really like cleansing and a nice clear way to finish the day. I also have a lot of digestive issues and so it's very calming for the digestive system with acid reflux and heartburn and that kind of thing. It's a really great tea to drink. I particularly like Twinings. I just find that their flavours are just really clear and strong, and it just feels really good to drink. So that's what I'm drinking this evening. Do excuse the dressing gown. It's getting colder in the evenings, and although I've done a bit of a wardrobe swap over, I haven't quite pulled out all my jumpers yet. So I'm pretty much straight into my dressing gown after work. So here I am in my dressing gown, but go and grab yourself a drink and we're going to start talking about insulin resistance.
I can't forget the day we met. Your eyes so blue, me piercing through. I can't forget the day we met. Your smile so bright, it made me swoon. Our love is like a summer's day, hot and endless in a magic way. Whenever I see.
So this video is going to be a little bit more not really scientific because I'm not studied as such, but it's going to be a bit more about the details and kind of the effects of certain aspects of PCOS. I had a 3-part video planned and it was proving impossible to get it all done and to get it all edited. It was just too long. So I've taken those 3 sections. I'm now going to do 3 little videos that are shorter in themselves and a bit more precise. So this one is going to be specifically about insulin resistance. I picked this one first because it's the one that I'm struggling with the most. It's the one that's causing things like my weight gain, which is what's kind of bothering me the most. It's the thing that I have a real goal about achieving is weight loss. So I wanted to talk about what it is and how it affects us. So insulin resistance, the standard explanation for it is when the muscle tissue, liver tissue and fat body cells start to ignore the insulin in your bloodstream as a signaler. So when we have sugar in our bloodstream, insulin is released in order to take out that insulin from our bloodstream and do something else with it. So it may send it to muscle cells to use for energy. It will send it to the liver to have as a store, so that if for any reason we didn't have sugar in our diet for a period of time, we have something to fall back on. And then once those 2 things are kind of saying they're full, they've had enough, then the insulin goes and takes that sugar and turns it into fat, or puts it with water to be stored as fat in our body, as again another backup system for storage, but also to keep our bloodstream clear. And what happens is when we have a high sugar diet, we create so much insulin that our cells start to go, hang on a minute, didn't I just see you? We've had this conversation before, move on, find somewhere else to put it. So the muscles reject it. They'd say, no, we don't want that. We don't need that for energy. We're just fine. Go away, insulin. And then it goes to the liver and the liver says, dude, I am full. I'm going to burst. I'm so full. Please do not give it to me. And so then it goes and turns it all to fat. And what starts to happen is the insulin will go through and won't get anywhere else to put it. So it won't be able to go to the muscles, won't be able to go to the liver, and our blood sugar remains high for too long a period. So our body goes, okay, we've still got some sugar in the blood, I know, let's send some more insulin, which means that insulin goes back to the muscles and it goes back to the liver. And again, You know, it's like someone knocking on your door over and over again for the same thing. We've had this conversation. I don't want the sugar, go away, insulin, I'm not speaking to you anymore. And then eventually they just stop answering the door altogether, and our body floods more and more insulin, and this becomes an increasingly difficult problem, and our cells become more and more resistant to it, which means more and more it has no choice but to turn that sugar into fat, because the one thing that has to happen is that sugar has to come out of our bloodstream. So when it can't do the normal things, when it can't do the most productive use of those energies, then it does just turn it into fat. So this is very similar to type 2 diabetes in a way, in that although we're producing the insulin, we're still having the same effect of the blood sugar remaining high, and our body not being able to do the usual things with it. So common symptoms of insulin resistance are things like thirst, which often leads us to drink more, which means you do tend to urinate more often. You will, of course, gain weight. It tends to be very much around the middle, very much around the stomach, and for women on the thighs and bum does tend to be where it sits. That's quite a common area for the body to store fat first. I don't know why, but if anybody does, obviously leave a comment as to why that seems to be the pattern. But definitely I know a lot of type 2 diabetics, as well as a lot of insulin resistant people, have said the same thing, that all their weight seems to go in this one place. And of course it then, because we've got things like high insulin in our bloodstream, high sugar in our bloodstream, this of course causes a lot of other problems. And one of the other common symptoms is high blood pressure. Now, there are lots of other things that can come along with that, but they tend to be not secondary, but it tends to be high insulin means we get these things. So things like polycystic ovarian syndrome. It can, of course, lead to type 2 diabetes because we end up overusing our pancreas. Having too much of any of our hormones in our bloodstream will cause imbalances with the rest of the hormone systems. So you can have issues with thyroid, pituitary glands, all of that kind of thing. So it's quite a complicated condition to diagnose, because it can vary a lot in people with their symptoms. You can have people with insulin resistance who don't gain weight. Now, I don't know how they do that. Like, that's almost not fair, but but it is true. But what that means, almost, because obviously our society is so weight conscious, when you start to put on that weight and you do all these things and you're not losing the weight, most people will get to a point eventually and go, hang on a minute, I'm doing all this calorie in, calorie out, I'm doing all this low fat, I'm doing all this extra exercise, and I'm still putting on weight as well. That's another thing, is that it won't just be, oh, I'm not losing weight, that they will actually end up putting on weight, that clearly something isn't right, and it will lead you to question it. Whereas, of course, if you're not gaining any weight, but you have things like fatigue, and for women, if you've got issues with your periods, maybe being irregular or being painful, and things that we're not obsessed with as a society, can quite easily then be pushed aside and considered normal. I know certainly for me, a lot of my period issues were considered kind of normal, and because I was the exact opposite of all the problems that my female relatives had, the issues I were having were totally opposite. So I was almost, I considered myself lucky. I really did, because the problems I were having were the exact opposite of the other issues, and it felt like I had the better end of the deal, until I now find out that actually is causing many other problems. But we don't then tend to investigate it, maybe certainly not as quickly, or maybe not at all, and so the weight gainer is kind of a benefit. So people with insulin resistance who aren't gaining that weight might not realize that some of the other symptoms that they're experiencing, especially when it's insulin resistance and not diabetes, so the normal diabetes test wouldn't necessarily pick up this high insulin as the tests stand at the moment, they could end up going on with this condition a lot longer. Whereas because we're obsessed with weight, when you start gaining weight and you can't lose it no matter what you do, then maybe you might start investigating, which is what I did. So of course, the whole key thing is insulin. Insulin is the root cause of our problems because it's a hormone that has quite a specific but also multifaceted job to do in our bodies, that when that gets out of balance, it has really bad effects. And so really not just the first, but really the only thing we need to start really doing straight away as soon as we know we have insulin resistance is control our insulin levels. And of course, the only way to do this is with diet. So we want to start looking at the obvious sugars. I mean, I don't think, I don't know. I personally don't know anybody that has either insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes that would turn around and go, I never have any added sugar in my food. I have a practically sugar-free diet. It doesn't happen. We're normally pretty obsessed with sugar. And so that's the first thing we want to start looking at. And I know that's what I did. First thing I did was set up a spreadsheet so that I could record all the sugar that I was eating. So I didn't just look at added sugar, because we do have guidelines and calculations as to how much added sugar a normal person should have in their diet. But obviously there's two problems with that. One is we're not normal. We have a deranged metabolism, so we can't take a normal amount of sugar. But also that means that nobody understands how much sugar is in everything else that we're eating that's naturally occurring that is also causing us problems. So I started to look at literally every piece of fruit, every vegetable, even meats, like literally anything that I ate. If it wasn't recorded on any form of packaging, then I would simply Google it. I mean, apples don't have packaging, so how much sugar is in an apple? Google it, and you'll very quickly find out things like red apples have more sugar than green apples. So you can make a very simple switch. Green apple for a red apple. I used to have an apple every single day. Keeps the doctor away. Apparently no, because it also turns out that fructose is one of the worst sugars for insulin resistance, because the way that it processes body, through the body. So the reason it's normally so much better for normal people is because the process is much faster and it gets them that energy much quicker. It's an easy process and it feels good for our body just to go, oh yeah, straight away, come on into the liver, done. That's not good for us because we can't access that energy that's in the liver. So we need to access energy from our sugars. We can't do that from our stores. It's why we continue to gain weight, is because not only does insulin resistance, first of all, stop us from being able to regulate our blood sugars correctly in the first place, and eventually leads to most of the sugar that we're eating being turned directly into fat. The main problem is, particularly with those fat cells, a high level of insulin in the bloodstream forces the fat cells to lock down. So you also can't access the stores. So even if you stopped eating sugar for like a period, I'm not talking about actual fasting, I mean, so you have a sugary breakfast, you have some fruit at breakfast time, and then you don't have a lot of sugar for the rest of the day. Well, that's great. But your insulin levels are still going to be quite high from that sugar in the morning. And so throughout the day, one thing that's not going to happen is you're not going to be able to access the stores, particularly the fat stores that you have. So it's a vicious cycle. You can't get the energy from what you already have. So you need to eat more in order to get any kind of energy, which means even more of that's being turned into fat that you can't access. So you need to eat even more. It's very common that the whole binge eating and eating so much that you feel almost sick because you're so full but you're not satisfied, all of that comes down to the insulin and the fact that it's not working in our body. So definitely the first thing you want to be looking at is what sugar you are eating. and how best to reduce it. So my next video is going to be focusing on foods that are good or not good or not good to eat, but talking about the how to understand what foods are best to eat. So I'll be talking about the glycemic index. So we can talk about replacement sugars, not fake sugars, but real sugars that can be used instead of white sugar or fructose, and how we can incorporate that and the benefit that that can have, and then a few of the surprising items that cause a very high insulin response within our body without necessarily being high in sugar, and kind of explain that a little bit more. So I hope that you found this video helpful, kind of explaining what the condition is and how it works. I will of course go into all of this in more detail as well as we go through the videos, pick out certain sections, but hopefully this gives you a general overview, and then I will see you very soon in the next video for some good foods to eat.